Yeah, Michael, I'm wondering how attending only to ourself relates to compassion.
If you're dreaming, and in a dream you may see a war, you may see a famine, you may see a pandemic, you may see poverty, all sorts of injustices and suffering you may see in a dream. What is the greatest good you can do to alleviate all the suffering you see in a dream?
Wake up.
Yep. And how to wake up from this dream?
Well, following a path.
Not following a path, following the path. There's only one path that will wake you up.
All right, focusing
because the sleep in which this dream is occurring is the sleep of self-ignorance.
Okay, that's all well and good, but when we reach that ultimate state, okay, it's the absolute truth, but for most of us, we're not in that, or we don't know we're in the ultimate state at this moment. So in the meantime, on the way there, isn't compassion useful to do something?
Then if go back and read Ribhu Gita, what does Ribhu Gita say? You are already that.
Yeah, that's great, but I don't know I'm already that, so it's just words in a book.
That is why self-attentiveness is the way to know that you're already that. Do not get me wrong, I am not against compassion. So long as our attention goes outwards, we should be compassionate. Not only should we be compassionate, if we are truly following Bhagavan's path, we will definitely be compassionate. What does compassionate mean? Passion means suffering. Com means with. It means suffering with. When we see someone else suffering, it pains us. So we suffer with them. That is what compassion is. So the more we go deep in this path, the more we will, the boundaries between self and other will dissolve. The more we will see ourselves in the others. So when we see others suffering, it will pain us to suffer. A very impure mind, a very cruel mind will not be disturbed by the suffering of others. So long as I'm not suffering, doesn't matter about others. I can inflict any amount of suffering on others, so long as I'm doing okay. That is the immature, the impure mind. But if we're following this path, our mind is getting more and more, the dirt is getting more and more removed from our mind. So it pains us to see suffering. So if we see the world, how many injustices there are in the world, how many forms of suffering. There's firstly the greatest injustice in the world at the moment is the huge wealth disparity. There are people who have hundreds of billions of dollars, and there are other people who don't even have enough to feed themselves. So many people in this world are barely subsisting. They're living in such poverty when there's so much wealth. So there's so much injustice in this world. Even if the world was a very just place, even if wealth was distributed equitably and everything, there's still so many forms of suffering. There's disease, there's old age. Suffering is inevitable in this embodied existence. So when we see the world, we see so many forms of suffering, and it pains us. If we are wise, we will. What can we do to alleviate the suffering of others? Can we even alleviate our own suffering? No, we can't. So if we are wise, though we are compassionate, Buddha was moved by compassion. What did he do? He was a prince, so surely he could have done something to alleviate the suffering in his kingdom. But he understood he cannot even alleviate his own suffering. He cannot alleviate the suffering of his beloved wife or his newly born child, because they will inevitably grow old, grow sick, suffer all the inevitable sufferings of embodied existence. So he understood the most compassionate thing to do is to find a solution to all these things. So Bhagavan has given us the solution. The solution is to turn within and see what we actually are. Because as soon as we see what we actually are, we will thereby wake up, the dream will come to an end, and we will recognize that what actually exists is only happiness. Nothing other than happiness actually exists. Bhagavan says it explicitly in Nana, in the 14th paragraph of Nana. Bhagavan begins by saying, Sukham embadu atmabin sarupame. What is called happiness is the very nature of oneself, is only the very nature of oneself. Sukhamum atmasarupamum verandru. Happiness and the real nature of oneself are not different. Atma sukham andre uladu. Atma sukham means the happiness which is oneself alone exists. Aduve satyam. That alone is real. So what actually exists, what we actually are, is only happiness. All this unhappiness, all this suffering we see is because of looking outwards, because we've risen as ego and we look outwards. Definitely when we look outwards and we see suffering, if we have got even a slight degree of purity of heart and mind, we will feel pain seeing that suffering. And of course, if we can alleviate suffering, if a hungry person comes to us and we have food, we give them food. We can alleviate that. If whatever we can do to alleviate the suffering of others, we should do. If someone comes to us with mental anguish, we can tell them about Bhagavan teachings if they're receptive, of course, only if they're receptive, and we may be able to alleviate their suffering in that way. So there's so many ways in which we may be able to alleviate suffering to a limited extent. But to put an end to all suffering for all time to come, for eternity. When we put an end to suffering, we also put an end to time. So even that, I didn't quite put it correctly there. So if we want to put an end to suffering for all eternity, all we need to do is to turn within and see what we actually are.